Why not? A Friendship is Monster, Monster High, and Equestria Girls crossover. Written by Spotty 8E. Twilight stared uncertainly onto her front lawn, glass door partially open, as the midday sun beat down on her. She was stunned for a moment, as it appeared that, in all impossibility, there was a girl internally combusting on her walkway. Stirred by the clatter of garbage cans, she left her lunch behind to find a human form crumpled up against the stone, skin peeling like lit paper, and smoke billowing in thick black clouds. Twilight wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't even sure what had happened. Tentatively, she hurried down the steps to the girl's side. "Hello?" Twilight put her hand to the girl's back, careful of the flickering skin and trying not to gag at the smell of burnt flesh. "Are you alright? What's happening?" Twilight shifted her around, trying to get a better angle of observation, when her shadow settled just over the exposed area of the girl's arm. The skin stopped burning and the smoke settled immediately. It began to heal at an incredible rate. Twilight was frozen. Could it be? She shakily reached for the girl's hair, brushing back the red locks to find a black mark on the girl's skin that had a striking contrast, swirling out elegantly in a detailed pattern, which was surprising for how small it was. Black lines crisscrossed along the junctions of her neck and shoulder, all leading to, or originating from, the same place. Two small puncture scars just above the carotid artery. Twilight ripped her hand back, jumping away from the creature on her lawn. A vampire. A vampire was on her lawn. Twilight, of course, had read about them. She had read about all monster races, if only for interest's sake, but she never expected to see one in real life, mostly because her gated community only allowed human residents. It also didn't help that it was also noon in the middle of March. Half tempted to make a mad dash back into her house and lock the door, Twilight looked up and down the street to see if anyone else was out. Nothing indicated where the girl had come from, making it seem like she had just fallen out of the sky. Given what she had read about vampires, that was entirely possible. Twilight bit her lip. What she had read about vampires, yes, she had read a lot of books, but most of them were on monster races in her town, or by humans. They were also not very flattering, and most indicated on how to weed out the races from humans to destroy them, or were history books on how much suffering the humans had endured at their hands. A few were atomical, but a majority were to point out weak spots and didn't go into very deep detail about their actual function. It was truthful the internet was where Twilight found the most reliable information, along with something she hadn't expected, like a werewolf girl who had a YouTube channel to show how to apply makeup over fur, or a fawn who had a pretty good skateboarding video. From Twilight's gathered research, the races weren't much different from humans, which meant the girl before her wasn't any different than Twilight herself, except that this girl could be dying. Twilight went back to her, trying to remember what she had read. Getting her out of the sun maybe was all she needed, so Twilight attempted to find a proper hold when a shout came from down the street. "I think it went this way!" Twilight snapped her head around, not seeing anyone, but hearing the chattering of an angry mob charging up the hill of her street. It wasn't hard to figure out what they were after. Doubling her efforts, Twilight hooked her arm around the girl, pulling her up. Choking on black smoke and struggling with the girl's weight, Twilight was surprised when the vampire weakly raised her hand to push her. No, stop! Leave me alone, please!" The red hair moaned weakly, not having the strength to break Twilight's gentle hold. I just want to go home. Please!" Grimacing, Twilight dragged the girl up her path to the door, fumbling with the handle as the mob got louder. The girl in her arms had her head dropped to the side in defeat, whimpering in Twilight's ear, I want my mom." The red hair released a sob as Twilight finally jimmied the door open and started in, only to be met with a block. "Ugh!" Twilight coughed when it felt like she was pushing the girl against a wall rather than a doorway. Pushing again, Twilight just couldn't get her in. The girl whined at the pressure Twilight was applying to the battered skin, and Twilight paused to think. Her ears ringed with the shouts of the mob still approaching. Had the gated community built houses that repelled monsters from entering somehow? Had her crazy grandmother done something to their home without her knowledge? Twilight racked her brains until an idea finally came to her. You can come in. Welcome to my house. Please, come in," Twilight said, trying to keep her voice low, although she was a little frantic at this point. Instantly, the invisible wall vanished and both girls fell inside. The red hair sobbed loudly when Twilight landed on top of her, but Twilight had no time to apologize. She spun around, quickly shutting the door as the mob just began to reach her neighborhood's home. Locking the bolt, Twilight finally found the time to breathe. "Okay, Vampires need to be invited to enter her home. Well, check that under facts then. Looking down at the girl again, Twilight noticed the living room bay windows were filling the space with natural light. Taking the girl around the middle once more, Twilight dragged her down the hall, through the dining room, and to the basement. It was unfinished, and her parents had relinquished most of the small space to her to share with the laundry as her laboratory. And since it was the basement, that meant there was very little sunlight to be had. She pulled the girl to the area under the stairs, then set to work making a fort around it, setting up a few stored traps to make a dark nest underneath. Twilight could hardly make anything out in the fort, but set her brother's old cadet sleeping bag for the girl to lay on. Just entering the basement had been a vast improvement over the red-haired girl. Most of her skin was back, and she was breathing easier. Placing her in the fort on the sleeping bag had almost brought her back to normal. Only, she was still out, mumbling incoherently and whimpering. Twilight, thinking fast, dropped the blanket over her before hurrying to her laptop, still on her desk. A quick search on Google, and signs of a vampire sunstroke, or why suntanning isn't a vampire's pastime. Twilight quickly clicked the link, hoping for some useful information. Vampires are known for being creatures of the night, but in this new day and age, that's almost impossible. While many modern advances have found a way to contradict the sun's rays on fragile vampire skin, that doesn't mean it will always work. How easy it is to forget to use your SP-1000, or have your umbrella blow away on a breezy day. Maybe your injection just happened to wear off in the middle of that Las Vegas vacation you planned. Well, worry not. This blog here is to point out the signs, symptoms, and treatment of your vampire sunstroke. Twilight quickly skimmed down, checking off the symptoms she had seen earlier to find the treatment phase at the bottom. To start treating vampire sunstroke, begin by going to a dark, damp place, anywhere the sun's grubby rays can't reach you. Once you're healed, speed depends upon rank. It is important to get a fresh feeding of blood too. During vampire sunstroke, a lot of your body's fluids get burned off trying to heal yourself while your skin boils away. As you know, the vampire body is technically dead, so it won't be making more of its own blood anytime soon. Try to find something to siphon, such as, if you're in a cave, a rat. Twilight pushed back from her computer. Blood. Oh god. She rose from her seat and quickly ascended the steps. Where was she going to get blood? Stepping into the kitchen, Twilight spotted Spike staring up at her on the counter, looking wistful up at her with her half-eaten sandwich. Nope. The thought didn't even register in Twilight's mind. Spike was many things, but a vampire snack was not one of them. She took the forgotten food and placed it in Spike's bowl, which the dog quickly accepted, licking at her fingers before diving in. Turning, Twilight found herself looking at a knife block on the counter. She was transfixed for a few seconds before shaking her head. No, she wasn't about to offer herself up as an all-you-can-eat suck buffet. She hardly knew this girl. Thinking again, Twilight turned to her fridge, opened it to look inside, and there before her was what she needed. 3 uncooked steaks were defrosted on a plate. Tonight's dinner. Twilight snatched them up and took them to the counter. She took a bowl and cooling tray and a rolling pin and set the object on a homemade press. Then, she rolled out what little blood was left in the steak that she could. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Putting the flattened meat back and carrying the bowl into the basement, Twilight slipped back into the darkness of the fort, finding the girl as she had left her. Going around to her head, Twilight lifted her into a semi-sitting position, placing the bowl to her slightly open mouth. At first, Twilight was worried for the lack of response. Perhaps the blood was too old. Suddenly, the girl's hand shot up, snatching the bowl out of Twilight's and swigging the rest of the liquid into her open maw desperately. She coughed, twitched a bit as the empty bowl slipped to the floor, her tongue lapping up the remains of the blood on her face. Mom, can I have more? Twilight paused. I'm sorry, but I don't have any more. The red-hair's eyes wobbled open, a bit hazy, but still comprehending. What, hello, are you in any pain? Twilight asked, leaning into their line of sight, pushing her glasses back onto her face. The red hair stared up at her, eyes turning from confusion to alarm. Who are you? Where am I? I'm Twilight. Twilight Sparkle. I, found you outside my home. You were on fire, I think from sunlight? Twilight winced when the girl weakly looked around her surroundings, eyes wide. We're in my basement. You're safe here. Why did you help me? Why not? The red hair stared at her, eyes narrowed in thought. She made no response to Twilight. Instead, opting to look around once more, her gaze falling on the bowl on the floor. Twilight looked at it as well, only to snap her gaze back at her patient, who began to shiver violently. "Oh, what's wrong? Are you cold?" No, naturally cold," the girl mumbled, just winching and placing a hand to her abdomen. "It just hurts." "What does?" The girl looked back at her, as though she was some kind of idiot. Yet, the look lasted less than a second as it melted into a softened expression of realization. "Well, vampires don't get enough oxygen from our own blood." Heartbeat too slow. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, tiredly, taking a few deep breaths before continuing softly. "Digestion tract is cut off from rest to supply the brain and muscles. Need to eat blood so organs will get oxygen from it." She frowned a bit as she opened her eyes. "Without it, it's hard to shut down." Twilight leaned into the girl quietly. "You drink blood every day?" No, only every few. Body doesn't need much." She shivered again, curling in on herself to whine. That blood, beef. I drank some from our fridge, steaks. I don't think it was the freshest." "Sorry." The girl shook her head. Enough for now. I'm still need more, but I'll survive." "For how long?" Twilight asked. "Hours." What should I do?" Twilight, right?" She looked up at Twilight cautiously, relaxing when she received a nod. Sunset. Shimmer, I need my mom. Phone's in bag. You didn't have a bag when I found you." Twilight blinked owlishly. "Shit." Twilight shook her head. "Just tell me the number. I can call it." Don't know. Clan got new phones. Being harassed. Someone never got call. Self." She shivered again, rolling into Twilight's side, who subconsciously held the girl closer. Don't know. Sunset, what's your mother's number? Maybe I can find her." Yet Sunset didn't respond. "Sunset? Sunset!" After giving the girl a little shake, the girl lolled over in her hole. Twilight laid her back down, panicking for a moment, but when she set the girl down, she found Sunset had simply passed out. Okay, I can handle this. Okay. "Twilight!" Twilight stared, grumbling from the enclosure, and looking up the stairs just as her father opened the door. "Twilight! Oh, there you are. Come on, I'm starting dinner. I could use a hand." Coming right up." Twilight shot one last glance under the steps before wandering up to the main floor. "I just don't understand it," Nightlight grumbled for the 5th time in their meal. A fresh baked dinner with scalloped potatoes and green beans. Twilight was just pushing food around on her plate as her mother rolled her eyes. "Nightlight, let it go." "No!" her father pouted, looking at his wife. "He said these were the juiciest steaks they had." "They always say that, dear. They're just trying to sell a product. Don't get fussy. We'll shop at another grocery store instead." Twilight Velvet spoke calmly, patting her husband's head. Maybe being in the fridge without a cover caused him to lose some moisture, or the grill was too high, Twilight mumbled, knowing full well why the steaks were rather dry. "Well, I guess that could have happened. Let's give him another chance. Maybe we just got a lousy batch," Nightlight agreed. "I was just looking forward to it so much. I love steak, and we hardly get to eat it." Twilight Velvet smiled while rolling her eyes, but paused when her phone buzzed, causing her to retrieve it from within her pocket. Twilight Sparkle stopped shoving food around long enough to take a mouthful of beans. Her mind, meanwhile, wandered to the unknown guest in their basement. It was starting to get dark outside. However, she doubted Sunset would be able to leave in her condition. Not to mention, she could get caught in the process. Meanwhile, the one thing that could fix her was both plentiful and unattainable. "Who is it, Velvet? Is it Haku again? I know she wanted you to edit those novels by Friday, but she's crazy to expect all of them done in less than a week." Nightlight frowned, shaking his head. No, it's not her. It's the president of the Homeowners Association," Velvet spoke, looking down at her phone. Twilight froze. "Well, what do they want? Another potluck at their civic center?" No. They apparently are sending out a message to everyone, so I suspect you'll get one too. Seems a vampire was seen wandering around town today." "A vampire?" Nightlight looked up. I didn't think any monster race would ever want to come here willingly. I mean, if they could even get past the gate." "Well, I guess one got in," Velvet said, frowning. "They say it just disappeared, so maybe it left?" "Well, I suppose that's good. Putting one of the monster races in this neighborhood is like putting a puppy on a crab breeding bench." Nightlight lifted one of his hands, echoing a crab clackling with claws in warning. "Speaking of puppies, shoo, Spike, shoo!" Velvet swatted at the dog begging at her feet. "Shoo, this food is no good for you." Spike whined up at her, ducking her swatting hand and scuttling under Twilight's chair with a disappointed grunt. Twilight, are you alright? Twilight jolted when her father spoke, looking at him wildly. What? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Just, thinking about my next experiment. Huh. Well, what do you think of doing for your March break then? I remember last year's experiment. That homemade solar panel is still working out in the yard. I'm not sure yet, Twilight mumbled. Maybe I'll take it easy this year. Potato battery or something? Or maybe you could try a social experiment? Velvet spoke, frowning at her daughter across the table. Honestly, Twilight, I know you're not the most sociable in nature, but you at least need someone to talk to outside of us. Twilight swallowed, poking at her food again. I don't know. At least try to get out of the house? Okay, I'm going to be researching tonight, so I'll probably sleep downstairs in my lab. Twilight looked up to her mother, catching her disapproving look before adding, and I'll take Spike for a walk tomorrow, maybe into town and see who I meet. Sounds like a plan, Nightlight agreed, taking the last bite of his steak, grimacing at the dry texture. After dinner was cleaned up and her parents were in their rooms, Twilight slipped back downstairs, dressed in her pajama bottoms and a more comfortable, older t-shirt. She carried a few spare clothes downstairs with her, saying they were in case she tried an experiment that night, but really, it was in case Sunset wanted to change out of her suit-smelling clothes. However, the girl hadn't moved an inch. She was just as Twilight had left her, only she was pale and still. Upon checking her, Twilight was frightened. It seemed like she was dead, but then again, as a vampire, she might not have been alive in the first place. Did that mean these were good signs? She hurried to her computer. How to tell if a vampire is dead. Vampires are creatures that have bodies that seem to exhibit features of being dead at all times. However, this is not the case. While their bodies have changed, vampires are not actually dead, but in a state of lessened living, like a sort of hibernation state. Their bodily functions have slowed down, such as a lower heart rate, 5 beats a minute, and they have slower breathing, 1 breath per minute. But, as long as you know the person in question is a vampire, then it's actually easy. Dead vampires don't actually have a body. Their bodies, upon death, turn to dust instantly. It doesn't even have to be from exposure to sunlight. Upon their demise, natural or otherwise, a vampire will just turn to ash. Okay, she was still here, so she wasn't dead. Yet. Twilight crept back to the den under the stairs, looking over Sunset quietly. Now that she had calmed down a bit, Twilight could see that Sunset hadn't taken a turn for the best in the hours she had been gone. She was definitely paler than before, and when Twilight shook the girl's shoulders, she was met without response. Twilight brushed a few stray hairs from Sunset's face. Maybe she could Google Sunset's name, find a social media account, and someone she might know from there. However, Twilight paused when she spotted some flakes of dirt on the girl's cheek, most likely from the stairs. Twilight swept it away, but paused when, instead of clearing the area, there seemed to be a bit more. She tried again and was met with the same result. With no small amount of horror did Twilight realize what she was dusting off wasn't dirt. She was removing the beginnings of Sunset's deterioration. She really was dying then, or starting to anyways. Twilight winced tightly as she checked the other areas of exposed skin. She found a similar buildup on the girl's arms, her hands. Oh god, what now? Sunset said she'd be able to survive a few hours on the blood Twilight had given her. However, it had been many hours since then, so time was running out. She needed blood now. Yet, the only place to get it was her plan B. Why couldn't she try to think up something sooner? Then again, what could she have done? Rob the blood bank? Kill a neighbor's cat? Gather her parents from a rousing game of Dr. IV edition? She didn't even know if it was safe to offer Sunset her own blood. She knew nothing about this girl, what she was like, or even if she was going to give a crap if she drained Twilight of all her blood or not. While it wasn't something Twilight liked to focus on, in the past, it was well known that humans and monster races did not get along. Humans were like playthings for the most part, and while many learned how to defend themselves to various monsters, it didn't really level the playing field. Sure, a stoked steak and garlic oil was better than nothing, but when a vampire has the power to snap your arm off one-handed, there's only so much that a toothpick will do. However, about 200 years ago, the humans had allied themselves with the witches, whom shared some rather interesting extermination techniques in return for a place among the human strongholds. Nowadays, there weren't any difference between the two. Humans, even monster-hating ones, loved witches. After all, it was the witch race that had left the humans to their own devices for the most part before the alliance, and were seen as heroes afterwards. Not to mention, they had a common enemy as well. The playing field was finally leveled. There could be a full-scale world war had the monster races not begun to reflect on past action. while a sudden threat the monster leaders had conceived agreed they were, in part, to blame and offered a peace treaty. And a very shaky peace was formed that had lasted since this day. That didn't mean neither side didn't have their opposers. Some monsters still had a sense of superiority that felt their pride wounded when the treaty was signed. Some humans and witches thought there should be more repercussion to the injustices that had been faced for so long. The legacy of such feelings were laying before Twilight, dying on her basement floor. Even with the fear of possible death, Twilight knew she couldn't just stand by while the girl crumbled to dust. So, not really knowing what she was doing, Twilight lifted Sunset into her arms, ready to give her what she desperately needed. Only, how did she do that? Should she slit her wrist? That seemed a bit over the top, not to mention it would freak her parents out. She could imagine how that conversation would go. In movies, vampires typically went for the neck, so maybe. Twilight shifted Sunset to the crook of her shoulder, offering the exposed skin to the unconscious girl. She pressed Sunset's mouth to junction and shivered when Sunset, barely open mouthed, scraped a stray fang over her flesh, the feeling akin to a sharp knife pointed. This might not have been a good idea. Only there was no time left for second guesses, or rethinking, or even backing out. It could have been a heartbeat in Sunset's ear, maybe the smell of food, but whatever it was that roused Sunset, it drove her to feed on the food so graciously placed before her. And from the first moment, Twilight knew that all the movies were wrong. What was typically shown as two small pinpricks stuck out like straws were so far from the truth, it was laughable. Twilight was frozen in shock as Sunset basically ripped her shoulder apart with her mouth. Fangs used to pierce needle-like holes in movies rippled through the flesh of her shoulder. Muscles shredded, and Twilight knew the horrible feeling of teeth crackling the underside of her collarbone. Then, two fangs sank into the area where the belly of the levator skeletal muscles would be, holding both Sunset and her meal in place for the feast to begin. A geyser of blood erupted from the wound. The girl lapped, almost like a dog, swallowing blood at a rapid pace, her tongue grooving into the cuts and tears of the wound to aggravate the injury more, drawing more nectar to her. Twilight could safely say this was the worst pain she had ever felt. Had she the power, she would have started to scream, or cry, or maybe both. However, she was frozen, only offering a squeak when Sunset, her power returning, shifted herself to grab Twilight in almost a bone-breaking hold with both hands. She again ripped into Twilight's shoulder, seemingly unsatisfied with the feed she had gotten, and plunged her ripping fangs so deep they dug into her shoulder. Here, things started to get blurry for Twilight. Even if the pain didn't dissipate, she could only hiccup weakly, whimpering as tears found their way down her cheek. This was it then. This was how she was going to die. Not in a lab accident, not on some scientific expedition, not even as an old woman toiling over some research results in her office, falling asleep on them and never waking up as she had statistically thought. She was going to die without having done a damn thing with her life. Twilight shuddered, pain stabbing violently into her, and her view blurred by tears and blood loss. This was really it. Sunset suddenly seemed to lax her hold on Twilight. Hands stopped gripping and were more just supporting. Her desperately lashing tongue slowed to a lazy licking, as she seemed to melt in relief of her suffering. Through the painful fog, Twilight had the nice thought that at least Sunset would be okay. Then, the red hair froze. There were a few seconds of nothing before she shifted, hands clenching before they wrapped themselves around Twilight to hold her weight, as Sunset drew her fangs away. If the girl was saying anything, then Twilight couldn't hear her. But she did feel a hand in her hair, pulling a large strand from the side of her face and out of her wound, clearing her shoulder. Hand shifted again, swiftly, at an almost frenzied pace before Sunset's mouth was back on Twilight. She shivered, sniveling softly before Sunset's fang punctured a little further back up her neck. This time, they were still, not tearing or shredding like before. Sunset continued on like this, nipping around the wound's edge until Twilight could feel a change. Pain receded. Slowly, it slunk away until the unholy burning in her shoulder had gone to a numb sensation, then to a comfortable, warm feeling. Twilight opened her eyes, finding things still blurry and that none of her limbs responded to the command she gave them. Then, she felt the sensation of Sunset's tongue back into her wound. It felt frickin' amazing. Had Twilight been more aware, she would have blushed at the soft moan that left her lips. But right now, she could barely register what was going on. The vampire that held her began to weave her tongue along the gash, much more organized than the pace before. As it wrung around the depths of the cut, Twilight could actually feel the laceration grow shallow. It only took a few minutes for the grisly sight to feel like smooth, unmarred skin. Twilight wasn't sure if she was imagining it or not, but the shoulder didn't feel like it was damaged anymore. Of course, it could have been whatever glorious substance Sunset had just injected into her, but she was so woozy, she couldn't ask. Twilight shifted again until she was the one being held in Sunset's arms. Opening her eyes again, she could see the other girl was talking to her. What was she saying? Twilight tried to read Sunset's lips, but just couldn't wrap her head around it. The red hair looked upset and worried, and Twilight finally found some limb control so she could lethargically lift her arm enough to pat Sunset on the shoulder. Sunset seemed to relax a little and leaned closer to her with some of the blurriness melting away. Are my glasses on? Twilight lifted her hand enough to flop it down on her face. Nope, no glasses. Twilight licked her dry lips. Wow, how lucid am I? Looking up again to Sunset, who was inspecting Twilight's old t-shirt. Sunset's clothes had droplets of blood on them. She could only imagine her old top was soaked thoroughly as well. As Sunset set Twilight down on the sleeping bag she had once been resting on, the human started to nod off. That was the first half of Friendship is Monster. Originally I came across the story by chance on FimFiction one day in the comments section and decided to give it a look. I was intrigued from the idea right away that it's a Monster High Equestria Girls crossover, since I actually do have some plans later on this year to do a review both of this story and Monster High itself. However, after some lack of motivation and bad luck getting other projects done, I thought I'd have this on handy just in case. I'll definitely do the second half of this story later on, but I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to do the rest of the series. Until then, tell me what you think and I just might consider it. At the very least, this will be good practice for me should I have to take over the narrator spot in Pride of the Apples. Until then, I hope this reading was at least worth your time.